Hey guys, so I thought that kind of doing a case study as a follow up to my last post about kind of choosing variations and why I prefer variations when it comes to rehab. I thought doing a case study after that would be a good follow up. Just kind of go through my thought process, a little bit of like what I think about how I approach rehab, and just kind of show an example of me working with an athlete through an injury. So as you can see, as we do a case study, it's a shoulder pain during bench press. Okay. So, kind of first off, kind of like like my thought process, like what I want to know whenever I'm first talking to an athlete about their injury. I want to know like the location of pain. It's pretty straightforward. Where does it hurt? I want to know how long it's been bothering you. Like, is this an acute injury? Did this just occur like last week? Was it 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago? Have you been dealing with this for a year or more? These are just some information I want to know. Just because one is going to help me just kind of in my own head think about like how long this might take to recover, and then also like how sensitive the pain might be. Right, with an injury that's really uh, early on, it might be a lot more sensitive and a lot more painful versus something that's chronic. It might be harder to resolve, but it might probably be less sensitive. So just something I think about. And then I want to know, was it a gradual onset or acute? So kind of same concept there. Gradually meaning that it kind of crept up on them over time. Acute meaning there's one incident, like I was squatting, felt a pop in my back, and my back flared up. Like that would be considered an acute instance of an injury. Um, I want to know, how is it currently interfering with your training? So are you not training at all? Are you having to reduce loads? Are you, only have you reduced your frequency? Like, hey, I was squatting 3 times a week. Now I'm only squatting once a week. Just things like that just kind of helps me get a better picture of what's going on, and just kind of like what situation I'm getting into. Um, I want to know any specific movements or positions that make it worse or make their pain worse. So for instance, like in a squat, right? Low back pain, very typical injury. Typically, we're going to see people with low back pain, and when they're squatting or deadlifting, their painful positions are going to be in the hole or pulling from the floor. You might have some times where somebody says they have back pain on the unrack, or close to lockout, or knee pain on a squat. That's the worst, coming out of the hole. We just kind of want to really, that's one of the major things I want to know is what positions during the lifts are most painful. So that's going to give me an idea of how I'm going to approach their finding an entry point for them and where we're going to start from. So that's whenever I'm interviewing a potential client, that's one of the things I really want to focus on is what what hurts, and is there a specific position or movement that's causing the most pain. um, we also want to know, are there any movements or positions that make it feel better. Maybe they've already figured out, like, hey, if I modify my range of motion in this way, it feels better, or if I do this exercise afterwards, it kind of alleviates some of the pain. That's just something that we can use to help, to kind of figure out, like, is there something extra we can do, or just like I said, another big another just um, piece of the puzzle to kind of use. And then we also want to know any significant injury history. Like, for instance, is this a recurring injury? Is this something that they've dealt with before? Um, like, they may have a history of, like, hey, this injury always flares up. Like, every time I get into meet prep, this is the same exact injury that I have. Um, and then also I want to know, like, what their goals are, right? Like, do you have a meet coming up in 2 weeks, right? Do you have a meet coming up in 3 months? Just what are their goals, like long term and short term? That's going to help get your wheels turning, is what we're going to do, or how we're going to approach it. Like, if somebody says to me, hey, I have a meet coming up in 2 weeks and I have 10 out of 10 back pain, then I might tell them, hey, maybe, like, how important is this meet? Maybe we need to just go ahead and sit it out and figure out your pain first. Or if they say, hey, I'm 3 months out from a meet and it's nationals and I really need to compete, then And so I think that's something where it's okay. Well, we might be able to make that work. Let's see what we can do, and to optimize like the potential that we're going to be able to get into that meet and compete at a high level. So lifter I was working with for this case study, his name's Alan. He's 110 kilogram power lifter, pretty strong dude. So we worked with him last year. So kind of a little bit about his history. So he had 6 months of anterior shoulder pain that was aggravated by pretty much any pressing movements, but especially dumbbell pressing. Dumbbell pressing caused the most pain, and then really any movement where he was crossing his arm across his body, and then obviously bench press, like any pretty much any pressing movement. Is what was really aggravating his pain, and he'd been dealing with this for 6 months, and pretty much at this point, he had been doing very minimal shoulder or chest training because of this. Consistently, his pain would come on around 130 to 140 kilograms. He had a 1 rep max of 210 kilograms, 463 pounds. So you can see that 130, 140 is not very heavy for him as far as like training loads. And so if you're only working in that range, we're not, it's training at that point is being significantly impacted if we're having pain already at that relatively light loads. Um, it was a gradual onset. So basically, what he told me was that he was kind of coming on the end of like some heavy bench blocks or heavy bench blocks of training, and then this pain just started creeping up on him until it was at a point where it was pretty much he couldn't go heavy at all without significant pain. Um, and then as far as positions that hurt the most, so he had it was very painful. The pain was really coming on at the touch points. Whenever you would touch and pause on his chest and press off the chest, that's where he would have most of his pain. And also want to add that Alan was your typical wide grip, high arch bencher, so already not a lot of range of motion. Um, but yeah, at that touch point was where he's having most of his pain. He had already tried modifying his technique as far as like more abduction, wider grip, closer grip. Um, wasn't really helping much at all. And he had already tried rehabbing by himself and also going to a PT. And I think the PT had him doing some exercises. They had given him some like rehab exercises, but they hadn't really messed with his bench itself. And he felt like it was kind of helping, but every time he would get back up to like 130, 140 kilograms, the pain would come back and he would start back at 100 kilograms. So he would start at 100 kilograms, be pain free, work his way up, and then consistently at that 130, 140 range, pain would come back and he would start over. So he was kind of in this, for like 6 months, he was in this loop of start at 100, up to 140, start back at 100, up to 140. Kind of like what I was talking about in that previous video, where we're doing a load that's so light that it's not really like it's pain free, but it's not really doing much to improve our tolerance. So, kind of coming off of that, like my thought process, like I said, I'm trying to find a good entry point for the rehab, right? So I want to figure out, where can we start at that's going to set us up for success, and then also allow us to train with the heaviest loads as tolerably as possible. So that's always what's in my mind, is like what movements can we do that will allow us to get as close to normal training loads as possible without aggravating or making the pain worse and having it be tolerable. Um, and then also, honestly, determining the correct dosage as far as volume goes is kind of a guessing game in the beginning, because you don't know, you can't say with 100% certainty, oh, this number of sets, this number of reps, and these movements are going to work. Let's do it, and then plan out an entire macro cycle for the rehab. You honestly just don't know. Um, you can make an educated guess based on your knowledge and what the athlete's presenting with, but things can change. You might write the first block up and then it goes to crap and you have to change things around. Maybe some things flare up. You pretty much have to be fluid when it comes to rehab. Um, and then also, but you can't have in mind, like what will your progression look like, right? Like, where are we going to start at and where do we want to end at? How are we going to make our way back to doing the comp movements or getting back to training normally? We want to have some kind of like framework in our head of how that's going to look. And then so also some things, some other my thought processes. I try to avoid actively changing technique or movement, especially because we know with a lot, like, with most of these powerlifters that are injured, they've been powerlifting for a year, 2 years, for a long time. Especially somebody who's experienced powerlifter, they've been using this technique um, for a long time with no issues. But now they're injured. So in my mind, it doesn't make much sense to chase down this path of saying, "Oh, well, we need to optimize your technique to get over this injury." Um, Maybe changing their technique will help in the short term because they're just moving in a different way, and you're no longer getting into those positions that aggravate the pain, and so maybe it's more tolerable for that reason. But more often than not, or what's most likely, is that that's what's happening. It is not that, oh, I changed your technique, you have less pain, your old technique was bad. That just really isn't the case. It's most likely just that you're moving differently now and it doesn't hurt as much. And because of that, I want to really actually just avoid trying to change their technique. I'd rather move in a different way by using a variation or reducing range of motion and go down that avenue. That way, that when it's time to go back to normal training, we don't have to worry about, oh, well, now my technique feels off, or now I'm like, I wasn't used to that. I'm just using a different technique, and now I go back to my old technique and now it's painful again. I want to make as smallest amount of changes as possible, so that when we do go back to normal training, we don't have anything we have to worry about, or fewer things we have to worry about. um, Also, specific structure and diagnosis don't matter much. We want to just focus on movements and positions that are painful. So somebody might say, "Hey, I think it's my bicep tendon, or I think it's my like infraspinatus, supraspinatus, whatever." Like they'll say they'll try to. We have this. We want to like know exactly what's going on a lot of the times, and a lot of times, and most times, it doesn't matter. It can just be a dead end and just like a rabbit hole you go down that doesn't really lead to much. Same thing with diagnosis. They might say, "Hey, it's subacromial pain syndrome." Um, Subacromial impingement syndrome, bicep tendinosis. There's all kinds of things that it could be, but really they don't matter as much as what movements are painful and what positions are painful, and how can we modify those movements and positions to allow us to pain comfortably or tolerably, and then progress our way back up. Kind of same thing. Don't sweat. Like same thing. Don't sweat the little things. Like honestly, I'm not checking people's range of motion. Um, I'm not checking, like how much internal rotation they have in their shoulder, and things like that. What their rib position looks like, because and honestly, it doesn't matter. Like just quite frankly, but probably doesn't matter. Because nine times out of ten, you may have somebody who let's say you test them, right? You test them and it's, oh, hey, your shoulder internal rotation is limited. Well, kind of like I said before, well, they've been training for years and just gotten hurt. So if their shoulder internal rotation was an issue, why are they just now getting hurt? And also, how do we know that that shoulder internal rotation reduction in range of motion isn't from the pain? Or even if you test like a muscle, let's say we test a muscle and the muscle is quote unquote weak. Um, how do we know that it's not just a weakness that's a result of the pain? Like pain can inhibit muscle function, and if your quad hurts, you're not going to push as hard with your quad. It's just, I want to say it's common sense, but unfortunately it's not. But yeah, if a muscle hurts, you're not going to push as hard with it. That doesn't mean that it's weak. It's probably just the pain is presenting as weakness. Um, and then also modifications to compound movements and accessories are going to have the greatest impact as far as rehab. I kind of like to tell people, if I'm rehabbing a powerlifter who can bench 500 pounds or squat 500 pounds or bench 500 pounds, giving them a body weight movement and then not touching their compound movements is, you're not going to have a good time. Like a body weight movement isn't going to provide the same stimulus or prepare you to move 500 pounds. It's just not going to. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. You could give them the most fancy corrective exercise in the world. if it's not weighted and then now they're doing 400 pounds, that's going to override that. It's not going to matter in the end. So for me, I'm always approaching how can we change the compound movements? Then we'll sprinkle in some accessories to try to help get some, maybe drive some adaptation, or even just get additional volume into, or load to that, to that area to help drive adaptation. Yeah, so just getting into the intervention, kind of what, like, the approach we had with Alan. Um, right off the bat, I'm thinking, okay, shoulder pain, it's typical. Like pain on the chest, like pain at the touch point, super typical presentation for shoulder pain in the bench press. And I kind of also want to just preface this by saying that this doesn't have to be complicated. I think people can it people complicate and people overcomplicate rehab, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be super straightforward. Um, and that's honestly something I struggle with sometimes, as far as making content. Honestly, is because sometimes I think to myself, well, it's straightforward. It's pretty simple. People don't really want to hear this, or people aren't going to be interested in this. But I mean, it's the truth though, right? Like, this stuff doesn't have to be complicated at all. So thought process is, Alan has shoulder pain on bench. It's most painful at the touch point. What are we going to do? We're going to reduce the range of motion. We're going to get away from that touch point that's most painful and work our way back down to that. So started off with Spoto press. With Spoto press, he can choose the range of motion he goes into. So he can, do a 1 inch Spoto press, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch. It kind of gives him the autonomy to decide how deep into that range of motion he's going to go, with the guidance of, we want to keep it tolerable. And the same thing with the block press. The block press, we have a set range of motion that we're going to go into. That's consistently at that 2 inch block press. Also, y'all are getting a little insight, into how I program. Um, what I typically like to do, or what I do is, I try to same thing. I try to approach it the same way you would train. So we're gonna have a top set and a back down set. So in that top set, we're gonna have, RPE target. We're also gonna have a pain target. Kind of like, I guess a term I could call, if I had to give it a term, was like rate of perceived tolerance. I have less than 3 out of 10 pain, but really that's an arbitrary target. Not everybody's 3 out of 10 pain is the same. What I really tell people is, is it tolerable or not? Most people, if they've been training for a while, they know what's tolerable, or and they know what's not. I kind of say is like, I'm looking for like uncomfortableness, right? It's like, so if something's uncomfortable but not excruciatingly painful, then we're probably fine. We can kind of push into that a little bit. Um, but we want that top set to kind of like push into that pain threshold, and then we'll do back down sets at a percentage drop to kind of get some more volume in under that pain threshold. So kind of like poking the pain threshold with the top set, and then getting more volume in afterwards with the back down sets. And then we have our accessories. We started off with landmine presses, just because it was one of those things, kind of like I said, where we kind of just start off with some guesses on what will feel best and what can work. Um, but we talked about it over the course of the first block, and landmine presses. You know, he didn't really like them. Honestly, I think he just didn't like doing them, and he said, he felt like he could dumbbell overhead press comfortably. So we ended up, I think, before even the end of this first block, we ended up, as you can see in block 2, subbing that out for dumbbell overhead press instead of landmine press, because he could do it tolerably and push it a little bit. So yeah, you'll see in this first block, with the Spoto press, he started off with 132.5 Spoto press and 155 kgs on block press. And you can see the pain ratings, like 0.5 out of 10 pain with Spoto, and then 2 out of 10 pain on the block press. And then at the start of the next block, he's up 5 kgs on block press, same pain level, and then up 7.5 kgs on Spoto press. Pain went up a little bit. In my mind, this is progress, right? So block to block, for the block press, we went up 5 kgs, but pain stayed the same. Pain still at a 2 out of 10, but in my mind, we're getting an increase in tolerance at this point, pretty much, right? So weight has gone up, but pain hasn't. We're making good progress in tolerance. Um, with the jump in pain on Spoto press, I wasn't too worried about it, and we weren't too worried about it. It's a 7.5 kg jump, and it was still within that tolerable pain range that we were looking for. Okay. So by the time we got to block three, we were starting to push into those heavier loads. So if you remember before, I was saying that he was getting to 130, 140 kgs, and then starting over because it was getting too painful. So what we've done is we've allowed him to push into these heavier ranges um, without it becoming aggravating and making his pain worse because we've been doing them in a range of motion that he could tolerate. So you'll see, this block for Spoto press, we're up to 162 and a half, and it's at a 0.5 out of 10 pain. Versus in the first block, we were at 132 and a half. So, I mean, that's a 30 kg jump, with same pain levels within the course of about 2 months. So that's pretty good progress, right? Um, so block press, we're at 170, one out of 10 pain, whereas we started off at 155. And so here, I believe by the end of this third block, we were already comp benching. And as you can see, and we also added in an extra day just for like machine press, extra upper body volume because his tolerance was getting better and he felt like he could handle more exercises. You'll see block four. Now we're doing Spoto press and comp bench. Now we're benching full range of motion, pain free at this point. And this is block four, so we're at the start of the fourth month. We ended up switching or flipping the Spoto press to be his primary lift, just because we felt like we could push it a little more with less pain. And at that point, I was okay. Well, we can push a little bit more, and then also almost get full range of motion, but not quite, and you just have more control over it. Versus a block press. And so we just thought, it made sense to switch it at that point and just let him push Spoto press. But same thing, at this point, we're pushing Spoto press at 170 kgs with no pain at the start of the fourth block. And then comp bench, we're doing 160 sets of four, no pain, pretty much. Then start of the fifth block, we're at a point now where he's comp benching twice a week now with heavy, relatively heavy loads. He's pain free at this point, pretty much. I think he may have like a little bit of pain, but not enough to where he's reporting it or really complaining of it much. And then you'll see so I jumped to the end of the sixth block, which is the last block we worked together, and he hit a PR of 215 kilograms. So it's 5 kg PR at the end of the sixth block with no pain, no issues, and this is just benching twice a week. So you can see that like we didn't do anything crazy. We didn't do any special movements. Like the accessories and all that's helped. You can see before dumbbell bench was extremely aggravating. He's dumbbell benching at the end of it. But it wasn't. This isn't anything crazy. It's nothing special. There was no, I wasn't. We weren't doing. We weren't trying to change his rib cage position. Didn't change his technique. Um, wasn't working on any range of motion movements. Everything that you see in this program is what I had him do. We weren't doing any corrective exercises. There wasn't any special warm ups I gave him. It was literally just this is the program that we followed. And he was able to resolve 6 months of shoulder pain in pretty much 4 months, right? Because by the end of the third block, he was pretty much almost pain free, or pretty much pain free in his actual compound movements. He was still having some pain in dumbbell bench, I think, at the beginning of the fourth block, just because dumbbell bench was what was most aggravating, and it's of greater range of motion than a comp bench, especially with somebody who has a high arch on bench. Um, but yeah, nothing complicated, nothing crazy, nothing out of this world. It's actually very straightforward when you think about it and when you actually look at the process we went through. And so look at the outcomes. This is just a video of that 215 kg PR. Nice, there we go. But yeah, that's pretty. Like I said, pretty awesome. End of after 6 months of not being able to train and very minimal training or really no training at all, and then after 6 months of that, and then at the 6 months end of rehab, hitting a 5K GPR. It's got to feel pretty awesome as an athlete as well. Okay. And so yeah, main takeaway for this, kind of like I said, is just keep it simple, man. This shit does not need to be complicated. A lot of the times, when I work with athletes, I tell them like, like this, it's not complicated. This isn't anything crazy. It's gonna be pretty straightforward. I'm not gonna, BS you. Or I'm not gonna make it seem like this is something you couldn't do on your own to make myself feel more important. I tell athletes a lot of the time, like, hey, like my place in this is to create the plan for you, and guide you through it, give you guidance, reassurance as needed, talk you through things. We can bounce ideas off of each other to kind of modify like things the way you need to. Like with Alan was a DPT student. He was experienced lifter, so I was getting his input as well, as far as like what he wanted to do. He was giving suggestions like the flipping spoto press to be his main lift in that, I think in that fourth block was his suggestion. He asked if we could do it, and he gave his reasoning for it, and I was like, yeah, let's go for it. And we made that move, and it worked out fine for us. It worked out well. But yeah, I think it's pretty much like at the end of it. I think, like I said, the main takeaway I really want people to have with this is just that, um, it does not have to be complicated. And then also just showing, kind of like I said, was that um, Alan was pretty much. I'm sorry, my cat's right here. What's up, Thunder? Um, but pretty much, yeah, Alan had been kind of spinning his wheels, trying to keep things pain free and just going really, really light. Versus, we were going relatively heavy from the like near the beginning of the rehab process, already pushing into those loads that he was stopping at, but doing so in a reduced range of motion to allow him to keep capacity, build capacity, then also just build tolerance. Um, and then once we did move into full comp movements, it was a very easy and seamless transition into doing those comp movements full range of motion. But yeah,